I wonder if you would expound similarly, Tim, on the freedom versus government point, which I think is so critical to your book. I mean, we've been living basically in the shadow of Ronald Reagan, who said, government is not the problem. Government is not the solution. Government's the problem. And there's been, I think, this residual and fallacious assumption in our political culture that more government means less freedom. And so if you want to be more free, you want to just get rid of government. And I think your book does an extraordinary job of just exposing that argument and debunking it. And one thing that occurred to me as I was reading it that I would love to get your comment on is the people who say that are never anarchists. I could respect an anarchist argument. People are saying, well, we just want to get rid of the state completely. But the people who say that always want to keep the state going for the purposes that they actually believe in. And that might be criminal justice and prosecution. It might be military spending, which is $750 billion or whatever it might be. But these are not people who want to dismantle government, but they use the anti-government argument against the purposes they oppose to say you will be freer without this. But I wonder if you would just spell out your positive argument for why government and freedom, just like freedom and security, can go together in so many cases.
Okay, let me make a couple of remarks about that before I try to hit it directly. And this bears on my earlier historical work. So one of the arguments that is made along these lines is that the Nazi Germany or Stalin Soviet Union or both show that if you intervene in the economy, you end up with totalitarianism. Right? That's the way the argument runs. That if you go away from the small state, it's like you're committing a kind of sin. And once you've committed that sin, then totalitarianism ensues. And one hears this argument all the time, and it's just historically completely incorrect. Nazi Germany did not arise because the Weimar Republic had good kindergartens, and Lenin did not make his revolution because the Russian Empire was offering longer vacations. That's not how it happens. In fact, as John Maynard Keynes understood and was a pioneer in arguing, if you want to avoid totalitarianism, if you want to avoid the anxiety and the disruption to people's lives that comes from unregulated capitalism, exhibit Great Depression for him, then you want to have the welfare state. You want to have the government doing certain things because that will make disruptions like 1917 or 1933 much less likely. So behind Reagan in 1980 was a certain understanding of the 1930s and 1940s, which I just want to say as a historian is not really true. The second remark on the side is that it's really kind of childish to just talk about government as though we're always bad, right? Like you wouldn't talk about someone's cooking. Like it could be good, it could be bad, who knows, right? The idea that government as such is bad is an incredibly childish idea. It's a very, it simplifies everything. There can be good government too, just like there can be good other things, and there can be very bad government. And following a thread that Jamie dropped, very often the bad government is created by the people who say you don't need a government. Because if you buy their argument, then what you end up having is a government which is designed for them. Because Jamie's right, there are anarchists, and by the way, anarchists generally don't believe in no order. They believe in different kinds of order, and I think there's really room for that in a good system. But in general, what people are saying, and to take the other example, what the Silicon Valley oligarchs are saying is that we should be allowed to control people's brains the way that we want to. Government should be set up so that we can do that, right? They're not saying there should be no government. All of Silicon Valley depends on government. It depends on government subsidies. It depends on government infrastructure. They're not saying get rid of that. They're saying no regulations on us because we want to have the monopoly on mind control, right? That's it. So then to make the argument positively, it goes something like this. We have to start from what kind of creatures we actually are. So in the negative freedom fables, like in our American fantasies, we are always, we're always adults. We're self-sufficient. We're capable of doing things on our own, right? The whole discussion of freedom starts from that. It starts with someone who is British male in the 19th century, owns a lot of property, perhaps has some superpowers, right? It starts from this image of a free person.
Able-bodied.
Yeah, exactly. Able-bodied, at the very least able-bodied, right? And in the background, you don't see it, but in the background, there are a bunch of women and slaves behind that person. You don't see it, but it's there. And so the question is, how do you get to a situation where you actually have a person who can be free, right? Because basically the whole Anglo-Saxon tradition of talking about freedom abstracts away from all the conditions that generated that person who might, be free in a certain sense. How do you create conditions where we can be free? And knowing what we know about child development, which is a big part of this book, knowing what we know about child development, we can say, okay, infants, children from 0 to 5, need certain kinds of interactions if they're going to develop the capacities, which in the book I'm calling sovereignty. We can say, knowing what we know about social media, we should or shouldn't have certain kinds of habits around machines if we want to be unpredictable. Knowing what we know about monopolies, knowing what we know about social mobility, we can say we need to have these kinds of rules, this kind of infrastructure if we want people to be mobile, and so on. In other words, we have to start from the kinds of creatures we in fact are, creatures in bodies, creatures with different kinds of bodies. We have to start from that and then work our way forward to, okay, we have to have certain kinds of work to be free, and that work has to be collective. You can't have a kindergarten just because one person has a child. You can't have a healthcare system just because one person gets sick. These things have to be done collectively, but when they're done collectively, they can be done well. The thing which does this collectively is called government, right? So you can legitimate and organize government in the name of freedom by performing things like organizing education and healthcare. And so this is the way that the argument builds up positively. You're realistic about what kinds of creatures you are. You ask what we need in order for those creatures to be free. You realize that takes collective generational work, and then that's an argument for government, for the right kind of government, right? For the government that starts with the things that helps to make us free. And I mean, this is kind of an argument, from my point of view, this is meant to be an argument also towards the left, like in terms of the words that I'm using, because a lot of the things I'm arguing for are consistent with left-wing arguments that often begin from equality, justice, solidarity. And I'm not against any of that. Solidarity is a chapter of the book. But what I'm trying to say is that a lot of the things that are part of the social welfare state, which are resisted on the right wrongly because of a bad argument about freedom, can be supported correctly with a good argument from freedom.